Cometh the Hour by Juliet Bell. Read by Dominic Minghella. The rain hit the young man in the face like needles as he made his way slowly down to the beach from the car park where he'd left the battered old van. He squinted against the onslaught of water, even as he shrugged away the wind that tugged and tore at his jacket and hair. His focus wasn't on physical discomfort. The turmoil was all in his head and his heart. He trudged down over the slick blue clay rampart to the black sands that stuck to his work boots, making his feet heavier than his mood. The tide was high, waves roaring into the bay like frenzied stallions trying to chase off intruders. A fitting day for it, he thought to himself. Rain streamed down his face and his chin, and he brushed it away impatiently, blue eyes searching the stormy horizon as though for inspiration. Out there in the grey swirling depths of the ocean, there had to be an answer to this, he thought. A resting, an ending to this weight that lay so heavily upon him. He watched the clouds boiling and scudding across the blackened sky, shedding their burdens over the mounting sea, and felt a moment of envy for their freedom. The cold rain trickled down the back of his neck, soaking his t-shirt and making him shudder involuntarily. He took a few steps closer to the surf, the incoming flow washing the black sands from his boots. He glanced around. The beach was devoid of life, except for him. The perfect opportunity. He stepped out further into the surf, and the crashing waves reaching to his knees, cold biting deeply into his bones. He ignored it, and continued to push forward till the water was lapping his thighs, the strength of the waves rocking him, causing him to lose his balance. As he staggered, he caught a glimpse out of the corner of his eye of another person, further down the beach but also in the water and struggling. He turned to face in that direction, the water buffeting him as he did so. Screwing his eyes up to see through the dashing rain, he took in the sight of an elderly man, up to his waist in the water, trying to maintain balance. Not taking time to wonder where this person had come from so suddenly, he started to wade furiously towards them, instinct overcoming his desire for peace. He found that he was shouting to the old man, nothing that made any sense but simple reassurance that help was at hand and coming. The old man turned to face him, waving desperately to him, before disappearing into the waves completely. He picked up his pace, forcing his legs to run through the surging tide and reaching the place where the old man had vanished a moment later. He cast about for a sight, a glimpse, and then saw a flash of a blue raincoat in the water. He grabbed at it and pulled, the heavy weight of it confirming that it was still attached to its owner. The old man appeared, gasping and choking from under the heaving waves, and grabbed at his outstretched hand, a surprisingly strong grip. Together they slipped and staggered out of the surf, to the relative safety of the sands, sinking down to rest in the dubious shelter of the cliffs. As their breathing eased and the adrenaline flow eased off, both men looked at each other quizzically. The older held out his hand in thanks, and after a moment's hesitation, the younger took it. He shook his head, not understanding the sequence of events that had led to their encounter. "What were you doing out there?" he asked incredulously. "You nearly drowned." He found to his surprise that he felt annoyance at the fact that his own attempt to disappear unnoticed had been so unceremoniously thwarted. The old man shook his head. "I was looking for something," he responded, then continued quietly, "Thanks to you, I found it." He wiped the rain from his eyes. "I'm Tim, by the way. Thank you for saving me." His faded blue eyes met the bright gaze of the other, and he nodded in gratitude. The younger man sighed wearily, feeling his annoyance slip from him like a cloak. "I'm Tim, too," he said, then realized how that could possibly be interpreted. "I mean Tim as well, not Tim 2 as in the number." He sighed again and brushed black sand from his hands. The old man chuckled. "I know what you meant," he said. "Quite a coincidence then, or serendipity if you prefer." He gazed out at the roiling clouds and crashing waves and shook his head again. "Can I ask you a question now?" The younger Tim shrugged his shoulders. "I guess so," he said, although he knew what was coming. "So what were you doing out there?" the old man asked gently. "It's an odd sort of day to go for a paddle." Young Tim glanced at his older namesake, feeling the familiar weight of despair and sadness settle on his shoulders again. He tried to gather his thoughts and his words without descending into self-pity. He found his throat tightening as he said with difficulty, "I came to find peace." He stared at the ground and tried with futility to wipe black sand from his trousers. "Peace?" asked the older man, nodding his head towards the sea. "Out there?" He shook his head. "No peace there for you, son." He tapped his chest. "Peace starts in here," and then tapped his head. "And in here." Tim the younger felt the familiar strangling of his grief rising to engulf him again. He tried to speak, but only managed a species of broken howl like a wounded dog. His body curled over in defense and his shoulders shook with the immense sobs that started to escape him. The old man placed his hand on the young man's shoulder, patting him as he would an injured animal. He let him cry, not making any attempt to interrupt the flow of grief. As the sobs gradually petered out, he removed his hand and just sat in silence, waiting. Tim straightened up, rubbing his face with his sleeve, hands still covered in grainy, jet-black sand. "Sorry," he managed to choke out. "It's just, I lost her and it was me. I drove her away." The old man nodded in understanding. "Your missus, then?" he asked gently. "Why drive her off if you loved her that much?" Tim shook his head. "She was too good for me, too beautiful, too bright, too kind. She was out of my league." He brushed his hair out of his eyes, looking helplessly out to sea. "What did I have to give her? I'm from a dog-rough council estate. She lives with her parents in a big house out in the country. I'm a labourer. She's just as qualified as a doctor. She was better off without me." Old Tim nodded. "I understand," he said. "And she agreed with you?" Tim shook his head. "No," he said, tears pricking his eyes again. "I hurt her more than anyone ever deserves to be hurt. That's why—" he gestured towards the sea. "I don't deserve to live after what I did to her." "Oh, no," replied the old man, "I don't see that." He stopped and looked at Tim reprovingly. "I don't see that at all." He paused for a moment before continuing. "You say you weren't good enough for her, but what did she say? Did you bother to ask? You say she was better off without you. Did you bother to ask her how she felt? You say you hurt her and now you don't deserve to live. How would she feel about that, do you suppose? Hurt her enough for one lifetime, have you? Well, how's she going to feel if you do that?" He nodded at the waves crashing onto the beach. There was a pregnant silence, then Tim turned towards the old man, realization in his eyes. "But she deserves so much better than me," he stammered, "and after what I've done, how can I possibly ask her to forgive me?" Old Tim shrugged his shoulders. "All I know is that you should give her the choice, and the opportunity to tell you how she feels, and not give her any more cause for grief than you already have, if you love her the way you say you do." He sighed and started to struggle to his feet, brushing at his clothes with his hands. He looked out over the sea, nodding as though to an old friend. "Well," he said, offering a hand to the young man, who was still sitting in stunned silence on the sand, "I'd best be getting back to my missus, or she'll be wondering what's become of me." Tim took the hand and stood up. The rain was still falling, but with less ferocity, and out on the horizon a solitary beam of sunlight broke through to shine on the grey-green water below. He looked at the old man in front of him, noting the silver hair and faded blue eyes. "Thank you," he said quietly. The old man smiled. "What for?" he asked. "For saving me," replied Tim. He placed his hand on the old man's shoulder briefly before turning and trudging back along the beach to the rampart and the steps back up to the car park. As he set foot on the first step, he turned and looked back to where the old man had been standing. There was nobody there. Tim turned and hurried back to the edge of the rampart to look up and down the beach. Nobody, and no one in the water. He stayed locked in that position as his eyes searched up and down, until a frisson of fear ran down his spine, and he turned and ran up the steps and back up the path to his van, and drove away, calmer, wiser, and full of hope for a future that suddenly seemed brighter, thanks to the wise words of an older version of himself. Meanwhile, on a hidden path away from the beach to one of the ancient cottages on the edge of the cliff top, the old man trudged wearily upwards, regretting the squelching of his shoes and the clammy coldness of his clothes. His wife met him at the top of the path, holding out her hands to welcome him. "Did you get to him in time?" she asked, as he took her hand and raised it to his lips. "I did, my love," he answered. "He should be fine now. Hopefully his girl will accept the apology this time." He led his wife back to the cottage and kissed her again. "So many wasted years it took us, my beautiful princess. But we found each other in the end." As he spoke, the sun broke through the clouds and shone down on the cottage, making it flicker as though made of smoke. And as the wind finally died down to a soft murmur, and the rain gradually ceased, what had been a cottage a moment before simply became a memory, accompanied by the rolling sound of the surf at the base of the cliff.